Kedushin. We're nearing the end of Kedushin, and the topic that we have been talking about for the last, I'd say, 10 days or so, sprinkled in almost every daf, has been the mamzer. Now, we spoke about the mamzer once, about a year ago, during Maseches Yevamos. We'll just review a few things. And I wanted to start off by quoting the Gemara on the bottom of Ayin Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara says as follows. We are on Ayin Beis Amud Beis 72b, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 12 lines or so from the bottom. Okay, just to recap, the Mishnah started off the chapter by saying that Ezra was successful, for the most part, in bringing back all of the Jews that had left and gone into exile back up to Eretz Yisrael. And the Mishnah lists off the 10 various classes: Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalalim, Gerim, Charurim, Mamzerim, Nesinim, Shtuki, and Asufim. So by now, if you're up to date in the daf, we've discussed pretty much all of these. The Gemara harps on the class of the Mamzer for a while, and actually has a discussion about the future of the mamzerim. So we'll start from Tanur Rabbanan on Ayin Beis Amud Beis, 12 lines from the Dam. Tanur Rabbanan mamzeru unesini tahorim lasid lavo. Tiva Reb Yossi. There's a machlokus over here, Tanoim, whether or not there will be this concept of mamzerim, okay, whether they'll be tahor or not in the days of Mashiach. Rabbi Yossi says that they will be tahor. Rabbi Meir Omer ain tahor. Rabbi Meir says they will not be tahor, meaning everything will remain the same. Okay, that's according to Rabbi Meir. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi v'lo kfar nemar. Rabbi Yossi says, let me teach you a pasuk. The pasuk says, "Zarakti alecha mayim tahor mutahartem." The pasuk in Yecheskel says that in the future you will become tahor. So it sounds like this pasuk could even include the mamzer, right? Now I believe Rabbi Akiva actually uses this pasuk in the Maseches Yuma, but over here we use it for indication that in the future days, there will be everyone in a state of tahara. Now, obviously, the mamzer isn't tameh like we know the expression tameh to be, but still, this is the source of Rabbi Yossi. Amalo Rab Meir, so Rab Meir says, "Kishu omer mikol tumosechem umikol gululechem." The pasuk, if you look a little bit further, talks about you'll be tahor from your tumah and from your filth, but v'lo min hamamzerus. But he ends off by saying, I don't see a mamzer being excluded, meaning it just sounds like you won't be dirty, which usually gulechem connotes avodah zarah, and you won't be tameh anymore. But that doesn't necessarily mean, says Rav Meir, that the mamzer will ultimately become tahor. So Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi says, "Kishu omer ataheretchem have omer af min mamzeros." Okay, so Rabbi Yossi says, I disagree. You will be tahor from everything. Okay, so it sounds like they are just arguing about this pasuk in Yecheskel Lamed Vav, whether or not a mamzer is going to be included in those people who are tameh now that will later on become tahor. Again, keep in mind, it's not tameh as we define tameh. It's the fact that they just can't marry Jewish women, right? Which is the exclusion that a mamzer has. So let's go on a little further. So Rab Meir says, this makes sense to me, my position, that they are not going to become tahor, they'll keep on being tameh. Mamzer ba'ashdod. Pasuk in Zechariah says that the mamzer will reside in Ashdod. Okay, and Rashi explains over here that they will be separated from the rest of the people. They'll have to live in a separate city. Sounds like because they have to keep to themselves and they can't marry in, right? Therefore, this sounds like a support to exactly what Rav Meir says. El Rav Yossi, Mai Vayashev Mamzer Ba'ashdod. What does that pasuk mean? So the pasuk means Kibbutagam Rav Yosef, like Rav Yosef would always frequently quote the Targum, Yasun Beis Yisrael Arachtzon Ba'arahon, right? That the people, that the Jews will settle in this place, in their land. Dahavu Dami Behu Lenuchrau. Not that they will become, not that because they're Tameh, so to speak, but they are just separated people. As Rashi explains on the first wide line, so it's just that they're going to be separated, right? They're going to be their own class, okay, and they're going to be, Rashi says, the nitrad. They'll be burdened like that of a mamzer, okay, and they're going to be a little bit outside of the border of Eretz Yisrael. And Rashi over here explains on the second line, V'Yehoshua chalka lahem, afal pishlo nichba shabiyamav. Even though Ashdod is one of those cities that wasn't conquered, in fact, we're going to see later on that Ashdod is one of the several cities that is considered an Ir Plishti, a Philistine, not to be confused with Palestinian, but Philistine city. It's separate. And even though Yehoshua divvied it up, but it wasn't conquered in his days. Okay, and Rashi brings the pasuk in Yehoshua to talk about those 5 cities that we're going to see later on. Okay, so that's the extent of the machlokes. And interestingly enough, the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha k'Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda says, we hold like Rabbi Yossi. Okay, now, before we get to the next line, there's an interesting discussion we're not going to talk about, which is the Gemara a few times in Shas has a concept of Hilchas Mashicha. We had it most recently in Zvachim, where sometimes the Gemara would say the halacha is like this opinion, but it's regarding a topic that is not relevant today. So sometimes the Gemara likes to ask, why are you telling me a halacha that isn't relevant? Like there's a halacha regarding Kodshim, and there's a halacha regarding one of the Misos Bezdin in Sanhedrin. And Tosfos, a few times in Shas, actually discusses why do I need to know this halacha if it's not practical today? And obviously, this case of whether mamzers will be mutter in the next world, that is obviously not practical for this world. So that's a side discussion of why I need to know that. But that is a interesting discussion. But anyways, the Gemara does go on to say one other line, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Amar Rav Yosef, Ilavda, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Rav Yossi. If it weren't for that fact that we hold like Rav Yossi, that says they will indeed become tahor la'asid lavo, have asa Eliyahu mapik minan svarni kolarin. Eliyahu would have to come and tie them up, right, and band them all together to know who's who, right? They have to go out in groups. So obviously, to separate them. So Eliyahu would have a very, very difficult job in separating all the mamzerim, but the Gemara says, thank God, we don't have to worry about that because there's no real problem of mamzerus in the next world. Okay, so that's that discussion. Just, whenever we talk about, mitzvos that apply in this world and apply in next world, right? The most famous, not the most famous one, but a famous example is the Orach Chaim in Parsha Shmini. I think discusses whether the Chazir, right, is going to be, tahor in the next world. And, all the Mefarshim say, well, is the Torah going to change? Like, what exactly is going to be different? Is the pig going to exhibit different simanim? Or it's going to stay the way it is, but it'll just be kosher? So there's a whole discussion of that. But here, the Rashba actually asks, on this Gemara, the Rashba asks an interesting question. I'll read it. He says, V'im tomar v'chi mitzvos lo yavo mamzer tibata la'asid. Right? Since when, says the Rashba, is the mitzvah going to change? Meaning the whole point of the Gemara saying that the mamzer has a future in the future is that presumably the only thing that the mamzer can't do, which is marry a Jewish girl, he will be able to do. So I don't get it, the Rashba says. Since when do mitzvahs change lasted lavo? Right? There's no source for that. So the Rashba answers, he says, V'yesh lomer dehora shati ela osen shahayu bedoras kodem bias Eliyahu. He says this is a one-timer that's going to be allowed. It'll be a one-timer for those generations that come right before Moshiach. She'Eliyahu ba'u mitaharin. Eliyahu will be mitaher them, and then we will have the next, and then we will have Moshiach. Aval osem shiu b'meha Moshiach apen yu psulin. But the Rashba explains our Gemara not to say that anyone born a mamzer, lasted lavo, is going to be a mamzer. It's just that if you make the deadline right before Mashiach, you will be singled out. But if you're born in Mashiach time, whatever that means, at least, then you will have a problem because the law will not change, as the Rashba says, because we don't change laws, lasad lavo. It's only for this world, right? The mitzvahs lo yavo no hegi le'olam af biyamav shel Mashiach. Because the mitzvah of lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem, or the lo taseh, will always apply even in the days of Mashiach. So I'm not sure how practical this discussion is, but I think after learning about mamzers for a long, long time, we're up to, I think, the 10th day already, it's safe to say that, there is hope. And of course, we learned the Mishnah on Daf Samach Tes, where Rav Tarfon says there's hope also, but that's, again, not very practical because there are no avadim and you can't marry an eved and have a kid and free the kid, right? Like Rav Tarfon suggested way back on Daf Samach Tes, if you remember. So at least this gives some glimpse into the hope of whether or not there will be hope for the mamzer. So it's interesting, the Ben Yehoyada, also on this Gemara, says, well, if you look at this pasuk, V'yashav mamzer ba'ashdod, says the Ben Yehoyada, nearly b'pasuk zeh nirma sod tam hamamzer. He says, from this pasuk in Zachariah of the Yashav Mamzer be'ashdod, you could actually see a glimpse of the source of what the problem of a mamzer is, the ta'am hamamzer. V'hu de'isa b'shar mitzvahs l'Rabbeinu ha'arizal. The Ben Yehoyada, as we all know, he's a Kabbalist, right? He lived in Iraq 150 years ago or so, right? So he always quotes the Arizal, the neshamos hamamzerim. Again, I don't know what this means, so I'm just reading what the Arizal says. You could look at it on your own. He says the souls of the mamzer and hen min hamalachim hanikraim kelim. They are from the malachim. Now, I'm not sure if I think he's referring to kings. He's either referring to kings or he's referring to angels. I think angels. Hanikraim kelim mibchina shadayin lo nivra. These are like unused or immature vessels. Shadayin lo nivra b'nitkana ela odena me'urevet b'sigim ra'im shel klipot. They are still mixed with the outer shell, and it's almost like they haven't hatched yet. These neshamos are like immature neshamos that haven't hatched yet. Ulkach asurin lavo bikal. Why? They can't marry Jewish girls, Jewish women who are already bikal Hashem, because Jewish women shehem neshamot haba'in min hamlachim achar habirur v'hatikun shalahem ayin sham. It says because we, the non-mamzers, are already, our neshamot are complete. Right? They are completed, and he leaves it at that. I just wanted to throw that in. I don't really understand it myself. We don't, talk a lot about this kind of Kabbalah, what it actually means. Just know that there's something out there, some kind of mystical reason. Speaking of mystical reasons, I want to segue to the Sefer HaChinuch. because the Sefer HaChinuch actually gives a reason why the mamzer is not permitted to marry into the Kal Hashem. So the Sefer HaChinuch in mitzvah number 560 says the following. Misharshe HaMitzvah. Now we're going to see this whole chinuch. I'm going to do a little bit out of order. So just bear with me. Misharshe HaMitzvah lefi shetoledes hamamzer ra ma'od. He says the conception, right? The way this mamzer is born is very bad. Okay. Shenasis betuma ubemachsheves pigol ba'atzas chet. Because the ingredients of this mamzer is done with tuma, pigol, bad thoughts, right? Comparing like to a Kohen who has bad thoughts about shechting a korban, right? In the wrong time that he's allowed to. The atzas chet, and with sin. The ein safek ki teva ha'av tzafun baben. And the teva of the av, the nature of the father, somehow through, I don't know exactly how, through osmosis, enters the son that's born. So therefore, God in his kindness distance us from this Nebuch son that was born, right? Again, no fault of his own, but because he was born imbued with all this tumah, so therefore we want to separate. Right? Just like God ultimately separates and distances us from bad things, from tumah things, right? We have many times, even the whole, right, at the end of Parsha Shmini, right? God says, why am I giving you all these rules of kashrus? Is lahavdil, right? Like we have the term lahavdil, right? So too it says lahavdil, everything else, right? To separate between the tameh and the tahor and the animal that we eat and the animal that we can't eat. So too, every single thing is lahavdil. Okay, so that's the chinuch offering, some kind of mystical reason. Now it's interesting. He actually talks about that this mamzer has some kind of siman, right? He's just different. And I think I quoted this Gemara from Maseches Kala about a year ago. So sorry if I'm repeating myself to all those who remember the third parak of Maseches Kala out there. It says Az Panim. Okay, Maseches Kala is one of the Masechtas Ktanos. In the third parak, it says that someone who is Az, as we say in Yiddish, and Uzus Panim, right? Someone who is brazen, bold-faced. Rabbi Lezer Omer Mamzer, Rabbi Yeshua Omer Ben Hanida. So there's a machlokes whether he's definitely something wrong with him, because Jews, the Gemara says in Yevamos, are Rachmanim, Baishanim, Gomer Chasadim, right? We're not bold-faced in general. So therefore, if you happen to meet someone who has this trait, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua says there's something wrong with him. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer says he's a mamzer. Rabbi Yeshua says he's a ben nida. Rabbi Akiva Omer mamzer u ben nida. Rabbi Akiva says, right, the worst of both worlds. He's a mamzer and he's a ben nida. Wow. So Rabbi Akiva piles it on. Says the Gemara in Maseches Kala, Pa'amachas hayu zakenim yoshin b'shar, the avru lifneim shtei tinokos. So two kids once passed in front of the zakenim. Okay, echad kisa es rosho, ve'echad gila es rosho. Zesha gila es rosho, Rabbi Eliezer Omer mamzer, the one who walked without a head covering. We also brought this when we talked about the concept of a yarmulke. We may have mentioned this. Rabbi Eliezer says, I know for sure that this kid that's not wearing a yarmulke is a mamzer. Rabbi Yeshua Omer ben Hanida. Rabbi Yeshua says he's not a mamzer, he's a ben nida. Rabbi Kiva Omer mamzer u ben Hanida. So again, so they are showing their opinions based on some kind of circumstance that they see. How are you, Rabbi Akiva, going against your fellow rabbis? Amar lahem ani akimena. He says, I will prove it. I will prove that I'm right, says Rabbi Akiva. Halach etzel imo shel tina, kitnios b'shuk. He went over to the mom and noticed that she was selling kitnios, beans, in the market. Amar labita, he said, my daughter, im at omeret li davar sha'ani sholach, ani mevecha chaya olam haba. If I tell you something, right? If you answer me something that I ask you, rather, correctly, I will bring you to olam haba. Amar lo hishavali, she said, swear to me. Hi, Rabbi Akiva, nishva b'sfasav. Rabbi Akiva swore, umavatal belibo. He took an oath, and he was mavatal it in his heart, right? So he kind of like crossed his fingers, what we would say. Amrullah bin chazemativo. So here's my question. I see your kid running around. Tell me exactly, what's the status of him? Amrullah, she said, Kishinichnosti lachupa nida hayiti. So when I went to the chuppah to get married, I was in nida at that time. Upirish mimeni bali. And my husband realized it, and he separated from me like he should. Uba alai shush bini. And the best man came and slept with me. Nebuch. V'hayali ben zeh. And out came this kid that you saw. So guess what he becomes? Nimtza zeh hatinok mamzer uben hanida. So this kid was obviously a mamzer because she was an arusa, and anyone who sleeps with an arusa is chayav misa, so that's a mamzer. And she happened to be a nida at the time. All right, we won't talk about Isser Chalal Isser because this is a little agadata. But anyways, so we see that unfortunately this kid had two strikes: a nida, ben nida, and a mamzer. Amru gadol haya Rabbi Akiva shehikches rabosa. Rabbi Akiva won the fight. Right, he was able to win the bet. Amru baruch Hashem elokei Yisrael shagila sodo Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef. Okay, so blessed Hashem who reveals his secret to Akiva ben Yosef. So why am I bringing up this story? It's an interesting story, because you could tell a lot about, sometimes looking at someone. And Rabbi Akiva had this feeling that not only he was a mamzer, he was a ben nida. Okay, so let us talk a little bit about the I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a second. So let's talk about the end of this sefer, the end of this mitzvah, number 560, because we want to learn a little bit of a halacha. And the sefer HaChinuch basically sums up the rules of a mamzer that we've been learning for the last week. So what are the rules? The rules are, let's look at the Sefer Chinuch, excuse me. Okay. Medina mitzvah masha'amru chachamim, shamamzer asra Torah, hu shenol min harayis and iskaras batorah, chutz min hanida, right? It's a child born of arayos, a prohibited union, except for the nida. Okay, uben habal arayis baratzon ba'onos b'shkago b'chol inyan nikra mamzer. Okay, the goy ve'eved abad malvas Yisrael abad kasher, as we learned that a goy or an eved that has relations with a bas Yisrael, it's not certainly a good thing, but at least the vlad is kasher and not a mamzer. Okay, the eved habayim al mamzeres havlad mamzer. Okay, the vlad, and if the mother is a mamzer, then the kid is a mamzer. Okay, and he goes so on and so forth, and the rest is just basic laws that we learned. I wanted to show you something in Avos Durav Nasan. So Avos Durav Nasan is a Masechta Ktanos that actually has dealings with Pirkei Avos, meaning the Pirkei Avos is Mishnah, and the Gemara on Pirkei Avos, we don't have a Gemara, but the explanation, like a Gemara, is actually called Avos de Rav Nassan. And in the 12th perek of Avos de Rav Nassan, it talks about the virtues of Aaron. It says that you should be a Talmud of Aaron because Aaron HaKohen was Oev Shalom, Rodef Shalom, and it says Umakarvin LaTorah, and Aaron HaKohen always tried to do good and always provide love between husband and wife and family. And Avos de Rav Nassan talks about what exactly Aaron used to do. So Aaron, reading from Avos de Rav Nassan, the 12th chapter, the eighth paragraph, says Umakarvin LaTorah Ketzad. What did Aaron do to bring people closer to Torah? This teaches us that a person should force other people. Okay? A person should always strive to always make people closer to God. Right? What did Avram do? Avraham would go and he would force, not literally force people, but he would try his best to be makar of them. Okay? And Avraham did it. Sarah also did it. So says Avos de Rav Nassan, "V'halo kol boy olam enem yochol nibaros, afilu yetush achad." So it's a very strange pasuk, and this is very timely. The Parsha Shavua this week, last week, it says "Vesanefesh asher asu b'charan." Avraham didn't create anybody, right? Avraham was there to makar of people, but yet the Torah describes him as creating souls. So the Avos de Rav Nassan says he can't create anything. If you got together everybody in the world, they still couldn't even create a fly. I mean, today we could clone, sheep and whatnot, but at least we can't really create something from nothing. So what does it mean that Avraham created something? What Avraham did was tantamount to actually creating them by making them religious. Okay, we see the holy virtue that a person can accomplish. And just as a person, right? And now he says that just like when a person can't give part of what he earns to his friends in this world, right? He will not be given anything in the world to come. Meaning it's actually a crime for everyone to keep to themselves and to not always try to help other people in any ways. That's the chiddush we learn over here, right? That we have to extend our hand in all circumstances. And if you don't, your punishment is that nothing will be given to you in the world to come. And he quotes a pasuk in Koheles, Shneimar v'hinei dimas hashukim ve'ein lahem menachem u'miyad oshkeim koach ve'ein lahem menachem. The pasuk in the beginning of the 4th parak of Koheles says that I'll read in English, look at the tears of the oppressed, they have no comforter. Power is in the hand of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. So what does that mean they have no one to comfort them? Why is it written twice? Lama nemar ve'ein menachem shtei pamim. Ele b'nei adam she'ochlin v'shotunu matzlichim l'banus v'banos b'olam hazeh. It's people who are taking part in this world, having sons and daughters and having a merry old time. B'olam haba ein lahem klum ve'ein lahem menachem. But when it comes to the next world, right, they have no comforter, right? For if she'im nignav alola adam gneva b'olam hazeh, because if someone loses a possession in this world, or shemeis lo meis, or loses a person, loses a family member or a friend, be'ein bana v'achav v'krova menachem so, right, and no one comes and comforts them, then yachol af l'olam haba, right? So the Mishnah over here says if a person has something taken from him, or if you know someone who dies, right, then his children, right, or other relatives come and comfort him. Do you think that you're going to have the same in Olam Haba? No, he won't. He won't get any comfort. Okay, so that's all the introduction. Here's the part that we need. Someone who commits a sin and gives birth to a mamzer, omrim lo reka, empty one, chavalta ba'atzmacha, chavalta bo, right? You sinned for yourself, right? Meaning you are suffering now because of yourself, and chavalta bo shoso mamzer hayirot salul motori imosan hatalmidim. And now you not only ruined it for yourself, you also ruined it for your son, because your son now wants to study. He wants to learn Torah with those people. Shahayu Yoshin Vishonin B'Yerushalayim. So look where he's going over here. He wants to learn Torah with those people who learn in Yerushalayim. And your son, the mamzer, went with that crowd to learn in Yerushalayim. Ashdod. And on his way, they stopped in Ashdod. Omed Sham va'omer. Oili ilalo hayiti mamzer kvar hayiti Yoshev b'shona ben hatalmidim shalimadati arachshav. He says, woe to me, if I wasn't a mamzer, I would have continued on my way to Yerushalayim to study with the rest of my friends. Ulefisha ani mamzer eini Yoshev b'shona ben hatalmidim. Because I'm a mamzer now, I can't go to Yerushalayim. Why not? So this whole introduction ends off by saying, "Lefisha ein mamzer nichnas liyushalayim kol ikar." So here is something that is not said in the Gemara in Kedushin, which is why I brought it in. According to Avos Rav Nasan and the explanation, this mamzer is not allowed to go to Yerushalayim kol ikar. Shenemar vayeshav v'yashav mamzer ba'ashdod. That's the way he ends off this by saying that pasuk that we learned as a proof to Rab Meir that the mamzer is going to be separated in a different city doesn't just mean la'asad lavo. According to the Avos Rav Nasan, we take this literally, that a mamzer is not allowed to enter into Yerushalayim, and explains the Binyan Yehoshua. He is one of the commentators on Avos Rav Nasan. He says, Afal Pi, right? What's the reason? Why can't a mamzer go to Yerushalayim? What if the mamzer is a Talmud Chacham? Afal Pi, the Isa B'Sof Meseches Horios, mamzer Talmud Chacham Kodem L'Kohen Gadol. Yes, even though we have a halacha, we're going to see soon that if you have a mamzer Talmud Chacham, he actually has priority over a Kohen Gadol who's an Am Haaretz, believe it or not. Shenema, the pasuk in Mishlei says, Yikara hi mipninim, right? You're more precious than pearls. We take that to mean that this mamzer is more precious than even a Kohen Gadol who gets to go into the base HaKodesh HaKodshim. Nevertheless, Mikol Makom Kedushas Yerushalayim Eino Soveles Oso. As good as this mamzer is as a Talmud Chacham, the problem is there's a aura of tumah, unfortunately, that follows this mamzer wherever he goes, and therefore Yerushalayim can't handle it, because the Hakadusha he kol kach gadol, the holiness of Yerushalayim, right, is so great it can't even accept the mamzer, unfortunately, because the mamzer lacks misha enum yuchas, he lacks yuchas. Therefore, lo yachol lihiyos lo yeshiva b'Yerushalayim. And that's what the pasuk means. Not that la'asad lavo. Maybe that means on an agadic sense that they're going to be separated, right? And they're not going to be able to join the rest of the Kal Hashem. But literally, a mamzer is not allowed to go into Yerushalayim. Now that we see that, let me go back to the beginning of the Sefer HaChinuch, Mitzvah 560. I started from the middle, right, where we talked about the mitzvah, where there's something physically impure with this mamzer. The Sefer Chinuch starts off the mitzvah 560 by saying Shenimna Hamamzer Melissa Bas Yisrael. The prohibition of the mamzer is solely to marry a Jewish girl. Valzeh Nemar Lo Yavo Mamzer B'Kal Hashem. Klomar Shelo Yavo Lisa Isha Mibnos Kal Hashem. Good. Aval Hikanesi Mahem B'Chol Makomos Moshe Sechem. But what if a mamzer wants to go and live in a place, right? Velisa Velita Mahem, and he wants to go open up a markolet, right? And wherever in Israel, he could do it. He absolutely can do it. And the proof is that a mamzer is so holy, right, or has the potential to be, that he even comes before Shmuel. Are you raising your hand?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I just noticed it.
I have a question for you.
I hope your arm isn't hurting.
It's not hurting.
Okay.
I want to know if you ever met a mamzer.
Me personally, no.
I don't think that there ever was one.
There is
I never
one
met one.
So there's one I saw in England. There's a few of them hanging out in England. I don't know how they got there, but in my little searching around, there are a few. And I don't know. There's
So
some
there really
chuvas.
is somebody who's a mamzer.
Yeah, and there's some recent chuvas, some contemporary chuvas about how to deal with them. It's very difficult, and I didn't even want to talk about it because it's a very controversial. So just try not to be one. That's my only advice. Anyways, so the Chinuch quoted this Gemara in Horios. I want to show you this Gemara in Horios because it's a very interesting Mishnah. It's not a Gemara. It's actually a Mishnah. The Mishnah in Horios says, let me open it. We're on Daf Yud Gimel, page 13 in Horios. Now, why is this in Horios? Because the end of Horios discusses, if you remember, the priorities about who comes before who. Men come before women regarding some things. Women come before men. And there's a pecking order, right? There's a totem pole of who's on top, who's on the bottom. And the Mishnah, Daf Yud Gimel, says, if you're curious to know, Kohen Kodem Levi, Levi Yisrael, right? Because the Asara Yuchsin doesn't necessarily go in order. It lists Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. It seems to go in order, but it's not really accurate. Because here, right after because on the order in Asara Yuchsin, Mamzer is like number 5 or 6. Here, it's right after the Yisrael. All right, it's Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. Now, order for what? So the topic, believe it or not, is actually getting called to the Torah. Okay, as we're going to see in a minute. Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. Kohen called him Levi, Levi Yisrael, Yisrael Mamzer, Mamzer Umamzer Nasin, Nasin Lager, Veger Eved Meshucher. That's what the order is. Kohen Levi Yisrael, Mamzer, Nasin, Ger, Eved Meshucher. And all the commentators say, what's the Mamzer doing first out of all the psulim? And the only thing that the Mamzer has going for him or her is that Sheba Metipak Shera. Even though the parents committed a sin, however, they were each kosher by themselves individually. It's called Tipak Shera. There's nothing wrong with them per se. The union was a no-no. But individually, those two were okay. Okay? So says the Mishnah, Emasai bisman shekulam shavim. When is this true? When what? When everyone, this whole rule about who comes before who, right? This whole precedent, when does it take effect? When they're all equal in terms of wisdom, okay, in terms of chachma. Avlim haya mamzer talmud chacham v'kohen gadol am haaretz. What if you have a rare situation where in shul you have a mamzer who's a talmud chacham, and the Kohen Gadol is visiting, right? But he happens to be one of those Kohen Gadols, if you remember in Maseches Yuma, Daf Tes, where it talked about there was a period of a couple hundred years where each Kohen Gadol wouldn't even last a year. They all died in the Kodei Kachim, right? They all dropped dead because they were bad. They were Amaratzim, right? They all died on Yom Kippur. So if that Kohen Gadol was actually in shul and you had to give an aliyah, Talmud Chacham Kodem LeKohen Gadol Am Haaretz, you would actually give it to the Talmud Chacham who's a mamzer, right, before the Kohen Gadol who's an Am Haaretz. A very fascinating concept. And if you think, it's simple, it's really not simple, unfortunately. If you look in the Yoredeya, in the Shulchan Aruch, the Aruch HaShulchan, they talk about this, and we actually don't hold like this, believe it or not. Most commentators in the Shulchan Aruch say we don't hold like this. And this is also Lamaisa today. If you have a Rosh Yeshiva visiting, right, and you have a regular Kohen who's whatever, a regular Joe, we'll call him, he gets the first aliyah, and there's nothing you could do about it. So we don't necessarily hold like the Mishnah. I think the concept is more important. It's a very deep concept. And I think before we get to a couple of the reasons why the commentators, talk about this, is I think it all comes down to, you may be born a certain way, but you don't really have much say in how you're born, right? We don't ask, right? What does it say in Pirkei Avos, right? That we don't really have a choice. Bal korchach atanolad. No one asked me or anyone to be born in a certain family, in a certain land, in a certain time, right? So obviously it's not our fault. The only thing that we could have shlita over, dominion over, is how we act and what we decide to learn and how we educate ourselves. So if you have an Am Haaretz, you obviously didn't do a good job, or your parents didn't do a good job. So therefore, it's like shame on you. It's not really shame on you if you were born into a certain family, to parents who committed nisar kares. So that's, I think, is more of the obvious explanation of why we don't hold like it, but why at least the Mishnah in Horios gives precedence to a mamzer Talmud Chacham over a Kohen Gadol who's an Am Haaretz. There's a very nice kliyakar I saw on the pasuk of Vatem tihiyuli mamleches kohanim v'goy kadosh. Says the kliyakar in one sentence, Malachim al hakohanim. Okay? Ki al yidei kabbalat haTorah yesh l'lomdeha yitron al hakohanim. What does mamlechet kohanim mean? So we say, okay, a kingdom of kohanim. Says the kliyakar, mamleches kohanim means malachim al hakohanim. By accepting the Torah, someone could become a king even over a kohen. How do you like that, Vart? Beautiful. Ki ayidei kabbalah satorah yesh l'lomdeha yisron al hakohanim. Ki afilu mamzer talmud chacham kodem l'kohen gadol. Forget your malucha. And forget your kohanic ability. You like that? I know. I loved it when I saw it also. I've never seen this before. Again, leave it to the kliyakar. We always have a kliyakar. We always have a bomb. Kliyakar, here's another one. Mamlechet kohanim. Right? You could become a melech on a kohen if you decide to be a Torah scholar. You become superior to the kohen. Beautiful vart. I saw a similar vart actually from the Orchas Tzadikim. Right, the Orchas Tzadikim, he says the following. We know that there are 3 kesers, or ketarim, right? Shlosha ketarim nichteru Yisrael. Keter Torah, Keter Kahuna, Keter Malchus. This is a Mishnah in the 4th chapter, as we know, in Pirkei Avos, right? Keter Kahuna, Aharon got, right? It's because the pasuk says, "V'haisalol zor achav bris kahuna solam." Keser Malchus zachabo David. Right, David got it. It says Zaro la'olam yihiyeh v'kiso keneged kishemesh negdi. And Keser Torah, what does it say about Keser Torah? Did someone get it? No. Harehu munach va'omed umuchan l'chol Yisrael. The Keser Torah is out there for each and every individual alive. Shenemar Torah tivulanu mor shakilas Yaakov. Kol misha yirtzeh yavo v'yitol. Shema Tomar Osan Kitarim Gedolim Miketer Torah. Maybe you're going to say that those two are greater. Harehu Omer, the pasuk says, "Bi malachim yimlochu v'raznim yochokuku tzedek, bi sarim yisoru." Halimata shekeser Torah gadol mikeser kahuna umikeser malchus. And this is also a Gemara in Yuma that keser Torah is greater than the keser kahuna and keser malchus. And on this we say, mamzer talmud chacham kodem l'kohen gadol am haaretz. Okay, very, very beautiful. So we have about 15 minutes left. So we saw this concept we just glanced over, and even when we learned it in Daf Yomi, right? The pasuk in Zechariah that says V'yashav mamzer ba'ashdod. So it piqued my curiosity, because unfortunately Ashdod is in the news almost every day, right? It's a city close to Gaza, and you don't really see Ashdod a lot in Tanakh. It's one of those cities that we just aren't talked about. So I said, let me look up this pasuk. So I looked up the pasuk in Zechariah, and I think and after I read the beginning of chapter 9 in Zechariah, I said, I can't believe in all these WhatsApp groups and Telegram groups that I see, I haven't seen anybody talk about this. So I hope, well, not I hope, but I think by coincidence, if you believe in that, that we learned that we should learn chapter 9 of Zechariah, because as we look at the first few psukim, if you have it in front of you, if not, then I'll say it anyway, but I think it's worth opening up the 9th parak of Zechariah. Okay, so just in general, the last few prakim of Zechariah, right? We call it Nevuas Zechariah, right? We know that Zechariah was a Navi. The Gemara in Gittin talks about how he was killed, right, in the Beis Hamikdash, and he was giving prophecy in his last 3 or 4 prakim about the times of Mashiach. So I just want to read the first, 6, 7, 8 psukim of the 9th parak of Zechariah. I think after I start reading this, I think everybody would want to look at this chapter. Masa dvar Hashem be'eretz chadrach v'damesek menuchaso. So Masa is a kind of a nevuah, right? Zechariah is having a nevuah, and it's interesting. I don't really learn Nach regularly, but I was looking in the Rashi and the Radak. There's a whole discussion over here for you, Nachniks, if you're into 929, or if you happen to enjoy Nach, or specifically Treyasar, whether this is a continuation of, this is a nevuah for the times of Mashiach, or this is one of those nevuos where the Navi is talking about the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom and the north and the south of Eretz Yisrael. So Rashi, I'm just going to learn Rashi, because Rashi says on the word Masad Dvar Hashem be'eretz chadrach, this is a nevuah, a word of God, in the land of Chadrach. So what is Chadrach? So Rashi says, I'm quoting from Rashi, Zechariah 9:1, Darash Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, Ze Mashiach, shehu chad la'akum v'rach liYisrael. We are talking about in the days of Mashiach. Mashiach is going to come from this land, some V'damesek. It's going to come from northern Israel / Syria. And the land of Chadrach is interpreted as Chad and Rach. Chad means sharp. So Mashiach will be sharp for the non-Jews and soft, V'rach liYisrael. That's why it's called Chadrach. V'damesek menuchaso. Mashiach will, or God will, reside in the land of Damascus. Ki la Hashem ein Adam, because for most people, right, they will turn their eyes to God. V'chol shiftei Yisrael, like all of the tribes of Israel. And Rashi says that on that day, Ki bayom hahu yisheh ha'adam Al osehu ve'enav el HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God will turn to his maker and look at him. Okay? Fine. So now, what the next few psukim in Zechariah are going to list cities, okay, cities in northern Israel. These are cities that, the way Rashi explains, are going to be extensions in La'asad Lavo of Yerushalayim, right? There are various Gemaras that say that the land of Israel is going to expand. In fact, if you look at, the parsha last week and look at map of what was promised to Avraham, Avraham was promised a land like today would be, I think, 5 times the size of Israel. You go all the way into Lebanon, into Syria, Nahar Pras, right? We know where Nahar Pras is in Iraq, practically. So obviously it's not that big geographically today, but this Nevuah expands on that a little bit. So the second pasuk in Zechariah 9 says, "V'gam chamat tigbal ba, sor v'tzidon ki chachma ma'od." So who's going to be included in the border? The city of Hamat. Hamat, or Hamas, if you pronounce it tough as Samach, is going to border that land. And Sar and Sidon, right? Sar in English is Tyre, and Sidon is Sidon, right? Ki chachma ma'od, they are very wise. And Rashi says, Chamat tigbalba tasig gvulos begvul Yerushalayim. Its border shall reach the border of Yerushalayim. And Tzor and Sidon, even though they're hundreds of miles north of Yerushalayim, they too are going to be considered Yerushalayim's villages. Okay? Okay. So let's bring more cities, okay, that are going to be part of this nevuah. About Tiven, Sor, Matzor La, right? It says that it says that the city of Tyre, right? If you look on a map, Tyre is across the border, I believe, from Metula, all the way up north, by the water, after the border, right? So that shows you how, right, the extent into Lebanon that the borders will be. So it says that the city of Tzor, Matzorla, will build a fortification. Vatitzbar kesef ka'afar, and she'll amass silver like dust. V'charutz ketit chutzot, and gold like mud in the streets. Meaning that this city is going to boast, Rashi says, of its wealth, right? It's going to be so wealthy that even gold to her is going to be like mud. Okay. Pasuk 4, Hine Adonai Yorishena, but what's going to end up happening in this nevuah of Zechariah is that God Yorishena will take her over, impoverish her, V'hika bayam chela, and will smite the city with, right through the water, V'hi ba'esh te'achel, and she will be consumed by fire. Okay? And Rashi says, all her wealth will be swallowed in the midst of the seas. He shall cause the sea to rise over it and sink it. Okay, so those are cities that are to the north and today Lebanon. Now we're going to talk about, if you remember how we started this whole shir, where Rashi on Daf Ayin Beis and Kedushin, when it talked about Ashdod, said that there are 5 cities that Yehoshua technically conquered, was Machalik, but didn't conquer them. And they are on the western side of Israel, if you see on a map, which unfortunately we see a lot today. So here are some cities, okay, that are in the news today. Tera, Ashkelon, Vatira. Ashkelon shall see, okay, the Tira, and will be frightened. The Aza, the Tachil Ma'od. Aza shall shake and tremble violently. The Ekron, Kihovish Mibata. And Ekron, which is another city, will also tremble at the collapse of her hopes. The Avad Melech Ma'aza, and the kingship shall leave the city of Aza, the Ashkelon Lo Teshev, and Ashkelon shall be free of inhabitants. No one should be living in Ashkelon. So the way Rashi explains that all these three cities, Ashkelon, Ekron, are all going to see the downfall of the cities in the north that are in Lebanon, which is Tyre, right, Sor, right, and they're going, and Ekron also is going to see what's happening up there, and they're all going to fear, okay, and Gaza will shake and collapse violently. All right, you can't make this up. I just saw this by coincidence today. Pasuk 6. Well, before we get to Pasuk 6, I learned the Rashi. Let's look at the Radak for a second on this Pasuk. It says the Radak on the Pasuk of Pasuk Hey. It says, the Avad Melech Aza, right? It says that not only will Aza collapse, right, and tremble, it says that the king shall vanish from Aza. Malka, says the Radak, Shahaya Baba Oso Hazman, the king or the queen who was there at that time, Yavedhu, will be lost. Vahamachut Shalo, everything will be lost. Kili Yisrael Tia, because in the future, Aza will belong to the Jewish people. Okay, beautiful. You could send that out tonight on one of your chats. The Yashav Mamzer, and I just want to say one thing that I don't know how many people there are out there, not too many, unfortunately, but in the last 3 weeks, I don't know how many hundreds of emails and WhatsApps and everything, and I can't believe no one has cited this perek or this pasuk in Zechariah, where it talks about Aza being destroyed, and Ashkelon and Ashdod, and this nevuah of Mashiach. Now, how do you know? Well, we'll get to why or the proof that this is the times of Mashiach. We'll see that in a second. But here's the pasuk vav: V'yashav mamzer ba'ashdod v'yichlati ge'un plishtim. And the mamzer, okay, will live in Ashdod, a city next to Ashkelon that we know. V'yichlati ge'un plishtim, and I'll uproot the grandeur of the plishtim. By the way, plishtim should not be confused with Palestinians. It's a common misnomer. It's a common mistake. The two aren't related. Anyways, so the psukim go on and on and on. Regarding this Ashdod, the Radak says, Yesh mefarshim shem umav, yesh mefarshim mamzer ma'arayis Yisrael, and then he quotes our Gemara about how this is one of the sources that this is talking about the future. The other source that this is talking about the future is, if you look 2 psukim later, comes the famous pasuk that everybody knows, because it says, Gili ma'od bas Tzion, Hari'i bas Yerushalayim, Hine malkech yavo lach, Sadik v'no shahu, Ani v'rochav al chamor, v'al ayir ben ha'otonot. Rejoice, Yerushalayim, your king is coming to you. Who's the king? He's someone who's going to be humble. He's going to be humble. Ani v'rochav al chamor. And he's going to come in on a donkey, which is, of course, a reference to the Mashiach. So this is proof that this is all talking about the Messianic times. Aza falling, although you don't have to look too far to notice that it may not necessarily be Messianic times, but I just thought this was an absolutely phenomenal, I don't even want to use the word coincidence, but I was looking up this whole source of what in the world are our mamzers doing in Ashdod, and I came upon this psukim in Zechariah. So I hope you enjoyed this. Wow, 9 o'clock on the nose. And hopefully this nevuah will come true.